The sun was setting over Palm Beach, painting the sky in stunning shades of orange and pink. The streets were quieter than usual, with only the occasional palm tree rustling in the warm Florida breeze. Behind the wheel of a sleek, black luxury sedan, Robert Chen felt at peace. After 15 years of driving some of the most influential people in the country, he had mastered the art of staying cool under pressure. This evening was different, though. As Trump's new personal driver, he knew every move would be under scrutiny. The former president had specifically chosen him for his spotless driving record and professional demeanor. Robert took pride in his work, ensuring every drive was smooth and every turn perfectly calculated. The car's interior remained pleasantly cool as he navigated through the exclusive neighborhoods. His passenger was busy with phone calls in the back seat, speaking about upcoming events and meetings. Robert maintained his focus on the road, just as he'd done thousands of times before. He checked his mirrors regularly, a habit ingrained from years of professional driving. The black sedan was well maintained, its dark windows reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Everything was running like clockwork until those familiar blue and red lights started flashing in his rearview mirror. Robert's heart rate picked up slightly, but his face remained composed. He'd been through routine traffic stops before, and his paperwork was always in perfect order. Following standard procedure, he carefully pulled over to the right side of the palm-lined street, positioning the car at a perfect angle near the curb. As he placed his hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, Robert could see the police officer approaching in his side mirror. The officer's hand was unusually close to his holster, something that didn't go unnoticed by Robert's trained eye. Years of experience had taught him to pick up on these subtle details. He rolled down his window, letting in the warm evening air. The scent of blooming flowers from nearby gardens mixed with the salt breeze from the ocean. Robert kept his movements slow and deliberate, knowing exactly how to handle such situations professionally. In the back seat, his high-profile passenger had paused his phone conversation, now paying close attention to the unfolding situation. The tension in the air was palpable, like a rubber band stretched too tight. "Good evening, officer," Robert said calmly, his voice steady and respectful. The next few moments would prove crucial, though he couldn't have predicted just how significant this routine traffic stop would become. The light from the police cruiser's spotlight filled the car's interior, creating harsh shadows that danced across the leather seats. Robert could feel beads of sweat forming on his forehead, not from fear, but from the Florida humidity and the intensity of the moment. His mind quickly ran through possible reasons for being pulled over. He hadn't broken any traffic rules, his driving was always by the book. The car's registration was current, the insurance up to date, and his commercial driver's license was valid. Behind him, he could hear his passenger shifting in the seat, clearly intrigued by the situation. What happened next would not only change Robert's life, but would spark a national conversation about prejudice, power, and the possibility of positive change. The evening breeze carried distant sounds of palm fronds rustling and waves breaking on the shore, a peaceful backdrop to what was about to become a pivotal moment in Robert's career. As the officer approached closer, time seemed to slow down, each second stretching longer than the last. This wasn't just another traffic stop. This was about to become a story that would capture the attention of millions, though Robert had no way of knowing that yet. All he knew was that he needed to handle this situation with the same professionalism and dignity that had earned him his reputation as one of the most trusted drivers in the business. Officer David Wilson's footsteps crunched on the gravel as he approached the black sedan. The sea breeze had picked up, carrying the sound of distant waves crashing against the shore. His flashlight beam cut through the evening darkness, illuminating the interior of the luxury vehicle. Robert Chen kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his breath steady despite the growing tension. Through the side mirror, he could see Officer Wilson's stern expression, a mix of suspicion and authority etched across his face. The evening had started so normally, but now the air felt thick with unease. "License and registration," Officer Wilson demanded, his tone sharper than necessary for a routine traffic stop. His hand remained uncomfortably close to his holster, a detail that didn't go unnoticed by either Robert or his distinguished passenger in the back seat. "Of course, officer," Robert replied calmly, his voice level and professional. "I'm going to reach for my documents in the glove compartment." He narrated his movements clearly, just as he'd learned to do over his years of experience. The leather seat creaked softly as he leaned over. Officer Wilson's flashlight followed Robert's every move, the beam almost accusatory in its intensity. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered before Robert could even retrieve his papers. The command hung in the air, unexpected and unnecessary. "Sir, I'm a professional driver," Robert explained politely, maintaining his composure. "I'm currently on duty with a passenger. If you could please let me show you my commercial license and credentials." "I said step out of the vehicle." Officer Wilson's voice rose, echoing off the nearby palm trees. The situation was escalating quickly, despite Robert's calm demeanor and clear attempts at cooperation. In the back seat, movement caught Officer Wilson's attention. The tinted window began to lower with a soft electronic hum. The officer's flashlight beam swung toward the sound, illuminating a face he certainly wasn't expecting to see. "What seems to be the problem here, officer?" The unmistakable voice of Donald Trump filled the night air. The former president leaned forward, his expression a mixture of concern and displeasure. "This is my personal driver you're speaking to." Officer Wilson's posture changed instantly, his hand dropping away from his holster. The flashlight beam wavered slightly as recognition dawned on his face. The quiet street suddenly felt very small, very exposed. "Mr. President," Officer Wilson stammered, his authoritative tone evaporating. I wasn't aware." "Clearly, you weren't aware of a lot of things," Trump interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to commanding attention. "My driver was following every traffic law perfectly. I should know. I was watching." Robert remained still, his hands never leaving the steering wheel. Years of professional training kept his expression neutral, even as his pulse raced beneath his calm exterior. The palm trees cast shifting shadows across the scene, their leaves rustling in witness to the unfolding drama. A few curious neighbors had begun to peek out of their expensive homes, drawn by the flashing police lights and raised voices. The quiet evening had transformed into something none of them had expected to witness. "Sir, I was just following standard procedure," Officer Wilson attempted to explain, but his words sounded hollow even to his own ears. The situation had slipped completely out of his control, and everyone present knew it. "Standard procedure?" Trump's voice carried a note of incredulity. "Is it standard procedure to treat a professional driver like this? To make demands without cause? To approach a vehicle with your hand on your weapon during a simple traffic stop?" The questions hung in the humid Florida air, unanswered. Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably, his boots scuffing against the pavement. The red and blue lights continued to flash silently, painting the scene in alternating colors that seemed to emphasize the tension of the moment. More cars were slowing down now, drivers curious about the unusual scene unfolding on their typically quiet street. Some had already pulled out their phones, recording what would soon become viral footage of an interaction that would spark national headlines. The night air grew heavier with each passing second, thick with the weight of unspoken words and uncomfortable truths. What had started as a routine traffic stop was about to become something much bigger. A catalyst for conversations that needed to happen, changes that needed to be made. And there sat Robert Chen, still professionally composed behind the wheel, unaware that this moment would soon make him an unwitting symbol in a much larger story about prejudice, power, and the long road to meaningful change. The morning sun had barely risen over Palm Beach when the first news vans began arriving. The video of last night's incident, captured by several onlookers on their phones, had spread like wildfire across social media. Robert Chen woke up to find his phone buzzing nonstop with messages from family, friends, and dozens of unknown numbers. Sitting at his kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, Robert watched as clips of the previous night played on every major news channel. The footage was slightly shaky but clear enough to show everything: the unnecessary aggression, Trump's intervention, and the officer's sudden change in demeanor when he realized who was in the back seat. Breaking news. Controversial traffic stop involving Trump's driver sparks nationwide debate scrolled across the bottom of his TV screen. Robert took a deep breath, trying to process how quickly everything had escalated. His wife, Linda, squeezed his shoulder supportively as she watched alongside him. "They're calling you a symbol now," she said softly, sliding a plate of untouched breakfast away from him. How are you feeling about all this?" Before Robert could answer, his phone lit up again. This time, it was a call from Trump's office. They wanted him to know that the former president was planning to address the incident in an upcoming press conference. Robert listened carefully, his years of professional composure helping him maintain his calm despite the whirlwind around him. Outside their modest home, reporters had already gathered. Through the living room window, Robert could see camera crews setting up their equipment on the sidewalk. The quiet neighborhood where he'd lived for the past decade had transformed into a media circus overnight. The incident was trending across all social media platforms. Hashtags like #RespectfulDriver and #TrafficStopTruth were gaining millions of mentions. Video clips of the encounter were being shared and reshared, each with its own wave of comments and discussions. News anchors across different networks were dissecting every moment of the footage. Some focused on Officer Wilson's approach to the vehicle, others on Trump's unexpected intervention. Political commentators from both sides of the aisle were weighing in, though remarkably, most seemed to agree that the incident highlighted serious concerns about law enforcement practices. "Look at this," Linda said, showing Robert her phone. A local community organization had already organized a peaceful gathering for that evening to discuss police training and community relations. The response was overwhelming. Thousands had indicated they would attend. Robert's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his supervisor at the driving company. Taking calls from every news outlet in the country, the message read, "They'd all want to hear your story. No pressure, but when you're ready to talk, they're ready to listen." The weight of responsibility settled on Robert's shoulders. He hadn't asked for this attention, hadn't sought to become the center of a national conversation. Yet here he was, thrust into the spotlight because of one traffic stop that went wrong, or perhaps, in a strange way, went right by exposing issues that needed addressing. CNN was now showing split-screen coverage, one side showing the viral footage, the other displaying live shots of the growing crowd outside the Palm Beach Police Department. People were gathering peacefully, holding signs calling for better training and accountability. Local news reporters were interviewing residents from the neighborhood where the stop occurred. "I've known Robert for years," one neighbor told the camera. "He's the most professional person you'll ever meet. Drives for all sorts of important people. Never had a single incident until last night." Social media continued to explode with reactions. Celebrities were sharing their own similar experiences. Politicians were calling for investigations into traffic stop procedures. Law enforcement officials from other states were weighing in, many acknowledging the need for better training and awareness. The Palm Beach Police Department had scheduled a press conference for later that afternoon. Officer Wilson had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation, standard procedure according to the department spokesperson. But the public wasn't satisfied with standard procedures anymore. They wanted real change. Robert looked down at his phone again, now showing over 100 missed calls. Each one represented someone wanting to hear his story, wanting him to speak about his experience. He turned to Linda, who had been his rock through every challenge in their 20 years of marriage. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Linda took his hand, her expression thoughtful. "I think you need to tell your story," she replied. "Not for the attention, but because people need to hear it. Maybe this is how real change starts, with one person's truth being heard." The sun was now fully up, casting long shadows through their window. Outside, more news vans were arriving. The world was waiting to hear what Robert Chen, the professional driver who never sought the spotlight, had to say about a traffic stop that had become so much more than just a traffic stop. Police Chief Thomas Richardson sat in his office, staring at the growing crowd outside the Palm Beach Police Department. The morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds, creating bars of light across his desk covered with incident reports and press releases. "Sir, the Internal Affairs team is here," his assistant called through the intercom. The chief straightened his tie, knowing the next few hours would be crucial for his department's future. The incident with Officer Wilson and Trump's driver had opened a can of worms nobody was prepared for. The Internal Affairs investigators, led by Lieutenant Grace Powell, filed into his office. Their expressions were grim as they laid out their preliminary findings. "Chief, we've been reviewing Officer Wilson's past traffic stops," Powell began, her voice steady but concerned. "The pattern is, Troubling. Data from the past 3 years spread across the chief's desk. Graphs, statistics, and incident reports painted a picture that made his stomach turn. Officer Wilson's traffic stops showed concerning trends that should have been caught earlier. The chief removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. Outside, news helicopters circled overhead, their distant chopping sound a constant reminder of the national attention focused on their department. Local residents had gathered with signs, their peaceful presence more powerful than any loud protest could have been. The press is requesting another statement. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom again. The chief had already given 3 interviews since morning, each one more difficult than the last. The public wanted answers he wasn't sure he could provide. His phone lit up with a text from his daughter, a rookie officer in another precinct. "Dad, they're talking about this in our morning briefing. We need to do better." Her message hit him hard. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about the future of policing. The department's training coordinator, Officer Ben Jung, knocked on his door with an armful of manuals. "Chief, I've been reviewing our current training protocols," he said, spreading documents across the desk. "I think I found some gaps we need to address immediately." The chief studied the training materials, noticing how outdated some sections were. When was the last time they'd seriously updated their approach to traffic stops? The procedures looked ancient compared to the reality of modern policing needs. His computer dinged with a new email. The mayor wanted an emergency meeting. The city council was fielding calls from concerned citizens, community leaders, and civil rights organizations. Everyone wanted to know what changes would be made to prevent similar incidents. A knock on his door revealed Officer Wilson's direct supervisor, Captain Michael Hayes, looking troubled. "Chief, I should have seen the signs," he admitted. The complaints were there, but they seemed minor on their own. Together, though, his voice trailed off, heavy with realization. The chief's phone rang again, this time from a police chief in another state. "We're all watching how you handle this," his colleague said. "Your response could set the standard for departments across the country." Through his window, he could see more news vans arriving. CNN, Fox, local stations, they were all here, waiting for the department's next move. Social media was buzzing with opinions, suggestions, and demands for accountability. Lieutenant Powell returned with more files. "Chief, we've finished our initial review of all active officers' stop records," she reported. "Officer Wilson isn't an isolated case. We have systemic issues that need addressing." The chief stood up, walking to his window. The crowd outside had grown larger but remained peaceful. He saw people of all backgrounds standing together, united in their call for change. Among them were several of his own officers off duty showing support for reform. His assistant appeared at the door again. "Sir, the police union representatives are here, and the Community Oversight Board is requesting an emergency session." The chief nodded, knowing these conversations wouldn't be easy. Looking at his department's mission statement mounted on the wall, "To protect and serve with integrity," the chief felt the weight of this moment. This crisis could either break them or become the catalyst for meaningful change. The sun was now high in the sky, but his day was far from over. More meetings awaited, more decisions needed to be made. The incident with Robert Chen and Officer Wilson had exposed cracks in the foundation that could no longer be ignored. Officer Jung returned with updated training proposals. "Chief, I've been on the phone with experts in de-escalation techniques," he said. "They're willing to help us rebuild our training program from the ground up." The chief gathered his thoughts, preparing for the press conference scheduled for the afternoon. The department's response needed to be more than just words. It had to show real commitment to change. The eyes of the nation were watching, waiting to see if real reform was possible. 2 weeks after the traffic stop, Robert Chen sat in the green room of a major news network, adjusting his tie nervously. His wife Linda had helped him pick out the suit he was wearing. Navy blue, professional but not flashy, just like him. In a few minutes, he would be sharing his story with millions of viewers. 5 minutes, Mr. Chen, a young production assistant, called out. Robert nodded, taking a deep breath. He never imagined his 15 years of professional driving would lead to this moment. His phone buzzed, a text from Trump offering support for the interview. Despite their different backgrounds, the former president had become an unexpected ally in this journey. The makeup artist made final touches, and Robert caught his reflection in the mirror. He looked tired but determined. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and decisions about how to use this unexpected platform responsibly. "What made you decide to speak up?" reporters often asked him. The answer was always the same: a quiet conversation with his teenage son the morning after the incident. "Dad, if you don't tell your story, who will?" Those words had struck a chord deep within him. The studio lights were bright as Robert took his seat for the interview. The host, a respected journalist, had promised to keep the conversation focused on solutions rather than sensationalism. "We'll live in 3, 2, 1. As the interview began, Robert spoke with the same calm professionalism that had guided him throughout his career. He didn't attack Officer Wilson or the police department. Instead, he shared his experience thoughtfully, focusing on how this incident could lead to positive changes. "It's not about one traffic stop," he explained to the millions watching. "It's about making sure every interaction between police and citizens is based on respect and proper procedure, not assumptions." Back home, his phone kept ringing with calls from police departments across the country. They wanted him to speak at training sessions, sharing his perspective as both a professional driver and someone who had experienced profiling firsthand. Robert carefully considered each request, wanting to make sure his involvement would lead to real change. His driving company had given him time off to handle the media attention, but Robert insisted on keeping some regular clients. "I'm a driver first," he told Linda. "That's who I am." The routine of driving helped keep him grounded amid the chaos. One afternoon, while waiting for a client outside a restaurant, Robert noticed a young police officer approaching his car. His heart rate picked up slightly, but this encounter was different. The officer just wanted to thank him for speaking out and sharing his story. Community organizations began reaching out, asking Robert to join discussions about improving police-community relations. He attended these meetings after his driving shifts, still in his chauffeur's uniform, offering practical suggestions based on his years of experience on the road. The Palm Beach Police Department invited him to review their new training materials. Robert spent hours providing feedback, drawing from his professional expertise. "Every traffic stop is an opportunity to build trust," he told the training officers. "That's something I've learned from both sides of the window." His son helped him set up a social media account to share updates about the changes being implemented. Robert kept the messages positive and solution-focused, even when commenting on difficult topics. His thoughtful approach earned respect from both law enforcement and community activists. Linda worried about the pressure on him, but Robert found strength in staying true to himself. He still got up early each morning, put on his driver's uniform, and went to work with the same dedication as always. The only difference was that now his influence extended far beyond the driver's seat. At home, the dining table often hosted informal gatherings of police officers, community leaders, and neighbors, all discussing ways to improve understanding between law enforcement and citizens. These conversations, fueled by Linda's homemade cookies, often produced the most practical ideas for change. The media attention began to fade, but Robert's impact grew stronger. Police academies started including his story in their training materials. Community organizations used his experience to illustrate the importance of keeping calm and professional during traffic stops. As weeks passed, Robert received an invitation to speak at a national law enforcement conference. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of police officers, he felt humbled. His journey from professional driver to advocate for change hadn't been planned, but it felt right. "Every morning when I put on my uniform," he told the audience, "I remember that professionalism and respect go both ways. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. Even a simple traffic stop can become a catalyst for something greater." 6 months after the traffic stop that made headlines, the Palm Beach Police Department looked very different. The old training room, once filled with outdated manuals and dusty presentations, had been transformed into a modern learning center. On this particular morning, 20 officers sat attentively as Robert Chen shared his experience during a new training session. "Remember," Robert said, standing confidently at the front of the room, "every traffic stop is a chance to build trust." The officers took notes, many nodding in agreement. Among them sat Officer Wilson, who had requested to be part of the training team after completing his own sensitivity courses. Chief Richardson watched from the back of the room, feeling a sense of pride in how far they'd come. The department's new training program had become a model for other police departments across Florida. Today, representatives from 3 other cities were present, eager to learn from their changes. The walls of the training room displayed the department's new core values: respect, understanding, communication. Below these words hung photos from community meetings and joint training sessions. Each image told a story of bridges being built between police and the communities they served. Officer Zhang, now promoted to head of training, pulled up the department's latest statistics on the big screen. Traffic stop complaints had dropped by 60%. Public satisfaction ratings had soared. More importantly, officers reported feeling better equipped to handle challenging situations. "Here's a real situation we faced last week," Officer Zhang explained, sharing a body camera footage. The video showed a tense traffic stop that could have escalated, but the officer handled it perfectly, using the new de-escalation techniques they'd learned. During the lunch break, officers gathered in small groups, sharing their own experiences with the new approaches. A veteran officer admitted, "I was skeptical at first, but these changes have made my job easier. People trust us more when we show them respect from the start." The afternoon session focused on practical exercises. Officers paired up, taking turns role-playing different scenarios. The emphasis wasn't just on what to do, but on understanding why they were doing it. Every procedure now came with context and explanation. Outside the training room, the department's lobby had been redesigned to be more welcoming. A community bulletin board displayed upcoming events: coffee with cops, neighborhood walks, and youth programs. The barrier between police and public was literally and figuratively coming down. Chief Richardson's phone buzzed with a text from the mayor. The city council had just approved additional funding for the department's community engagement programs. What started as a response to crisis had grown into a genuine commitment to change. In the dispatch center, new protocols were in place. Call operators had been trained to gather more detailed information, helping officers approach situations with better understanding. The old shoot first, ask questions later mentality had been replaced with understand first, act appropriately. Robert's influence extended beyond the training room. He had helped design a new handbook for both officers and civilians, explaining rights and responsibilities during traffic stops. The guide was now being distributed at DMVs across the state. The department's website featured a new public feedback system where citizens could rate their interactions with officers. Positive stories began pouring in, officers helping stranded motorists, handling difficult situations with patience, building relationships in the community. That evening, as the training session wrapped up, an unexpected visitor arrived. Trump had stopped by to see the changes firsthand. He toured the facility with Chief Richardson, nodding approvingly at the transformations. His support had helped maintain national attention on the department's reform efforts. The local news was there to cover the visit. Reporters who had once camped outside demanding answers now came to report on success stories. The department had become a case study in how crisis could lead to meaningful change. In the parking lot after the session, Robert chatted with Officer Wilson. Their unlikely friendship had become a symbol of the department's transformation. "I never thought that night would change everything," Officer Wilson admitted, "but I'm glad it did." As the sun set over Palm Beach, Chief Richardson stood at his office window, watching officers and community members mingling at a department cookout. The aroma of grilled burgers wafted up, along with the sound of laughter and conversation. The changes weren't just on paper, they were visible in every interaction, every traffic stop, every community meeting. What had started as a crisis had become an opportunity for real transformation, proving that with commitment and understanding, positive change was possible. 1 year had passed since that fateful traffic stop in Palm Beach. Robert Chen stood at his kitchen window, sipping his morning coffee and watching the sunrise. His routine hadn't changed much. He was still Trump's trusted driver, still wore his uniform with pride, but the world around him had shifted in remarkable ways. His phone lit up with a news alert. Another police department, this time in Michigan, had adopted the Palm Beach model of training. The changes that started in their small corner of Florida had rippled across the country like waves on the ocean. "Dad, you're in my textbook," his son had exclaimed last week, showing him a new chapter in his criminal justice course. The incident was now being taught in police academies nationwide as a turning point in modern law enforcement training. Linda walked into the kitchen, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your interview is trending again," she said, showing him her phone. Someone had shared the clip where he explained how respect and understanding could transform any interaction. The video had gained millions of new views overnight. At the police department, the changes had stuck. The new training center, now named the Community Bridge Academy, hosted regular sessions where officers and civilians learned from each other. Officer Wilson had become one of its most passionate instructors, sharing his own journey of transformation. Chief Richardson had retired last month, but not before seeing his department become a national model. At his retirement party, he told Robert, "Sometimes the best changes come from our harvest moments." The new chief, a woman who had helped implement the reforms, was carrying the mission forward with even greater enthusiasm. The morning news played quietly in the background as Robert prepared for work. A reporter was interviewing a young officer in Dallas who had diffused a tense traffic stop using techniques learned from the Palm Beach program. "I just remembered Mr. Chen's words about every interaction being a chance to build trust," the officer explained. Trump had kept Robert as his driver, often proudly introducing him as the man who changed American policing. While Robert always felt this was an overstatement, he appreciated how his former passenger had consistently supported the reform efforts. Outside police stations across the country, the signs were changing. Protect, serve, respect had become a common motto. Community feedback boards showed increasing trust between officers and citizens. Traffic stop complaints had dropped significantly in departments that adopted the new training approaches. Robert's phone buzzed. A text from Officer Wilson. "Just finished training another class. Your story still moves people." That unlikely friendship had become a powerful example of how understanding could bridge any divide. The local community had changed too. The annual police department barbecue now drew hundreds of residents. Officers knew people by name, and citizens felt comfortable approaching them for help. The us versus them mentality had been replaced by a sense of shared community. Universities were studying what they now called the Palm Beach effect, how one incident of potential conflict had transformed into a nationwide movement for positive change. Researchers found that departments adopting the new approaches saw improved relationships with their communities and safer conditions for both officers and citizens. As Robert headed out to his car for another day of work, a young officer who lived next door waved hello. "Thanks again for speaking at our graduation," she called out. Robert smiled, remembering how nervous he'd been giving that academy graduation speech. Now, sharing his story felt as natural as driving. Linda had organized all the news clippings and letters they'd received over the past year. The scrapbooks sat on their coffee table, a testament to how one moment could spark lasting change. People still wrote to thank Robert for sharing his experience, each letter reminding him why speaking up had been so important. At traffic stops across the country, things were different now. Officers approached with respect, drivers responded with cooperation, and what could have been tense moments often ended with handshakes. The ripple effects of that one night in Palm Beach had created waves of positive change that continued to spread. As Robert pulled out of his driveway, heading to pick up Trump for another day of driving, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The incident that could have divided people had instead brought them together, proving that positive change was possible when people chose understanding over conflict. The sun was fully up now, promising another beautiful Florida day. Robert adjusted his mirror, straightened his tie, and smiled. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest moments. Even a simple traffic stop could become the catalyst for something greater.